All right. So we got 9:01. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me just look at the participants. We're at 50. We may wait. Yeah, it's moving up pretty incrementally. We may probably about 30 seconds and we'll get started. Really appreciate everyone being on time this morning and really excited about our session and look forward to having this time together. The participants like a ticker. So as it's ticking up, I'll wait till it slows down a little bit and then we'll get started. Now that I've drawn everybody's attention to that, so we'll get started here in a second. All right. So we've got an action-packed session here today, very full. We've 4 panelists is unique for these things in some regards, so we're going to really try to get through this early part quickly and get to the meat of the conversation. So welcome everyone. My name is Ethan Gill. I'm the president at Helios HR. I want to welcome you to the Human Capital Impact Forum here at the end of April, titled Well-Being at Work, Key to Engagement and Business Sustainability. This topic obviously is at the forefront of many people's minds, and so we're excited to have some of the best experts in this area to talk and share information with our group of attendees here today. Helios is a leading talent management consulting firm in the greater Washington area. We help organizations thrive during times of transition, growth, and uncertainty. We probably have checked all those boxes over the last 12 to 24 months, and so we are really proud of our reputation here in this area. We're coming on 20 years of business, and really proud to represent this Northern Virginia region in Northern Virginia area, as well as the Mid-Atlantic. So thank you again for everyone being with us here today. Our vision with the Human Capital Impact Forum is to bring CEOs and HR leaders together and provide meaningful information that can help accelerate business change for the positive within organizations that participate in these sessions. And so we are committed to that, and we're excited to deliver that again here today. Before we get started, we got a couple housekeeping items. You do see that I think people can see that we're recording this session. If not, we are recording this session. If you have a question as we're going through the presentation and the panel discussions, please just place the question in the Q&A. We do have a lot of content to share today. We're going to get to as many questions as possible. What we typically do is questions we can't get to, we will try to answer those or address those in the follow-up communications to the session, as well as potentially in future blog posts from the Helios organization. So, but please insert your questions. We want to get as much information transferred to people on this call as much as possible. We also have polls that we're going to do throughout the presentation that I think are very important just to highlight here at the beginning. Really want great participation in those because we've been able to get very meaningful data from those poll exercises that organizations have been able to take back and use positively within their organization. So wanted to highlight that. And then before we get started, we're going to go ahead and just talk about our sponsors. For without them, we would not be able to have these sessions. And so very, very proud of the sponsors and the impact that we've had with them. First is United Health Group, a Fortune 7 company. They are working to play their part in creating a more sustainable healthcare system, one that delivers on their mission to help people live healthier lives and make the health system work better for everyone. We also want to thank NFP, the 5th largest privately owned insurance broker in the country. Locally, our longtime partners have more than 25 offices across the Mid-Atlantic, forming the largest insurance broker and consultant in the area. Third, we're pleased to highlight our partnership with the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce. Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce is the voice of business in Northern Virginia and the place where our region's leadership, business, education, nonprofit, and government comes together to create greater and equitable growth for everyone. We're grateful to these organizations for their hard work, integrity, and support of the Human Capital Impact Forum. So thank you very much for their participation and support. Now, let me introduce you to our panelists today. I have an outstanding group for this topic and excited to announce them as well as hear from them here in our session. The first I want to introduce is Taylor Adams. Taylor is the Director of Workplace Mental Health at Mental Health America. Founded in 1909, Mental Health America is the nation's leading community-based nonprofit dedicated to addressing the needs of those living with mental illness and promoting the overall mental health of all. Welcome, Taylor. Denise Crute is our second panelist. Denise is the Director of Learning and Development at IQ Solutions, a public health communications company with about 300 employees. Denise also plays a major role in supporting client projects such as the Office of Minority Health and Health Equity and the NIAID Office of Training and Diversity. Third panelist today is Jeanette Quesada Kunkel. Very excited to have her. She is the Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer for NFP. She directs the full spectrum of human resources for nearly 6,000 global employees. Jeanette is an engaged advocate of the caring and collaboration that are critical to NFP's success. And then our fourth panelist today, we have Nikki Salcedo, the Vice President, Client Strategy for Optum Behavioral Health. In this role, Nikki supports clients with strategy, education, and innovations that improve the health of their employee populations. Nikki is also a certified instructor of adult mental health first aid. Welcome everyone. Very excited for you all to be here. So we know this issue has come to the forefront. And so let's just kick it off. Let's start off with a little bit of a foundational conversation or foundational content to kind of level set with everyone. We know this is a big issue. I do want to start with Taylor. Taylor, if you can talk to us a little bit about, this obviously in your organization, you've been focused on this. 1909 is an incredibly old and established organization. But you're right at the forefront. You see what's going on kind of a macro level. Talk to us about how we've gotten to this point, and let's take it wide, and then we'll go ahead and make it more narrow as we go through and make sure that we have really meaningful takeaways for our participants here today.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, thank you so much for having me as part of this panel. Very excited to be here, except some of the things I'm going to share are not as optimistic. So we've seen over the past year a dramatic increase in people who are screening at risk or moderate to severe for depression, anxiety, and even psychosis. And this information comes as part of our online screening program. So we see this information in real time as people are taking screenings. It's like an 800% increase in depression. And we recently released our Mind the Workplace report to better understand some of the challenges that employees were specifically facing during the pandemic. So we looked at the perceptions of over 5,000 employees across 17 different industries in the US over a 9-month period in 2020. Some of the things that we found, I think from my standpoint, weren't necessarily surprising, but 9 in 10 employees report that their workplace stress has been affecting their mental health. And that makes sense given the fact that there's been an entire shift in routines and work-life balance and a variety of other challenges that employees have been facing. One of the other things is that less than 5% of employees strongly agree that their employer provides a safe environment for people who live with mental illness. And this isn't specific to the pandemic. This is kind of true across the board, even before we were experiencing some of the challenges with the pandemic. There's been a huge increase in the amount of people who've been feeling burnt out. A lot of the earlier stages of that, I think it's 1 in 4 people are feeling, that emotional, mental, physical exhaustion because, people haven't been able to go on vacation like they normally would, or really don't have a sense of taking time off of work looks like, right? When you can't really travel and make those plans. So we're not in a great position, but I'm excited to hear what some of our other panelists have to share about the way that they're addressing some of these issues.
That's great, Taylor. And you do remind me too, I should have said it up front, but one of the things that we're definitely going to do as part of the follow-up with this is we're going to reference and include as many tools and assessments and any bit of information we can provide to maximize the value add from this event. We're going to do that. So you're going to hear things that the panelists mention at assessments and tools and things of that nature. We're going to try to include as much of that as possible in our follow-up communications for that. So thank you for reminding me of that. Taylor, thank you for that summary. We look forward to getting back to you real soon. Nikki, if you can, from your macro level too, I think you've got a nice vantage point with Optum of, what are you seeing kind of across the spectrum? And then what we'll do after that is we'll go to some more specifics, kind of what did we see, what did these organizations see at their kind of slice of the beach ball type approach. So
Sure. I agree with everything that Taylor said. Behavioral health has been a concern prior to COVID. We had an unusual year last year with COVID-19 and social unrest. So we know mental health conditions are prevalent. Um, but we also know people have been struggling to access care. So only about 40% of people who have a diagnosed condition accessed care in 2019. And what does that mean for us having this conversation today? There's a direct impact on our productivity, our healthcare costs, and healthcare outcomes. And there are ways we can mitigate these. So part of our conversation today is how do we change the culture where we work? How do we change how people access care? How do we educate people on mental health? So I do think it's a good news story. There's a lot of work for us to do, but we have technologies and tools in place and increasing awareness. So these conversations today actually make a huge difference.
yeah, great. Totally agree. And let's go ahead then to the organizational perspective. Let's start with you, Denise. What, from an internal operator leader perspective, give us a high level summary of kind of what you saw the progression within an organization.
Sure, Ethan, thanks. Our company is a little different from some of the other companies represented here in that we work solidly, almost exclusively in public health. Have been doing that for close to 30 years now. And so it's like for our employees, it's um, just a process of trying to put their best foot forward in presenting just all of the guidelines and the strategies for good public health. And sometimes that can be extremely stressful, particularly, I mean, this past year has been and not only a challenge on the just in terms of just trying to keep up with what's going on, but also internally with employees in terms of what's going on outside, and then having to deal with their own fears and concerns about this pandemic. And I agree with Nikki and Taylor. This happened. Issues around behavioral health really began before the pandemic, but they were certainly exacerbated by this pandemic, and all of the other things that have gone on. So we essentially we started our efforts around looking at employee well-being like back in 2008, when we realized that we had an employee base that was very health conscious, and really wanted to commit ourselves to kind of walking our talk. We're out there and we're advocating health and wellness within the general public through our campaigns and the websites. And a lot of the work we do is for FDA, CDC, NIH. We wanted to be able to be a role model within the organization for how you go about maintaining and sustaining and establishing your well-being, and both on the behavioral health side and also on the physical health side. So we created a program that over the years has grown to deal with all of those various issues. And I have to say, one of the most important aspects of dealing with behavioral health was the education of our managers, who sometimes see issues happen and don't really know how to deal with them. Sometimes didn't report them because they didn't want to, they didn't want to be judgmental, or they didn't want to, make an assumption about someone's behavior. And we realized that we needed to educate them on not only what to look for, but what the proper response would be within an HR framework and just within a concerned manager framework.
Yep.
So that's kind of been our approach in terms of behavioral health. but we've over the years have created something that started off as just some health fairs
Yeah,
to now a full-fledged program that that deals with every aspect of the employee's well-being, from financial
sure.
to behavioral health, the physical health, nutrition and diet. And now, as a result of this past year, also dealing with some issues around, how do you remain resilient in
Yep.
these very challenging times?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And that is, you've got an interesting scenario, right? So you're a service provider to the healthcare world, right? So you're providers as well as, like you said, and you see this a lot of consulting companies, you have to practice what you preach. So you're trying to be cutting edge on the service side. You now have to do these things. And
Absolutely.
like many macro business issues, they are multi-layered. There is no shortcut. It is where you start, for that. So awesome. Jeanette, go ahead and round out this conversation. You've certainly, are in this space to some degree as well, and you have a large employee population. So definitely interested to hear kind of your progression. Again, foundational vantage point, and then we'll go ahead and build off of that.
Yeah, very, very similar to Denise's experience. It's been a journey, and I think wellness and well-being, will continue to evolve, and organizations need to be keen to listen to what and where employees are at different points, right? We definitely started with an approach to wellness from a physical standpoint, right? Let's make sure that there's education around screenings, around preventative care, around health fairs, like Denise was sharing with us. And as we went along this journey, we really took a step back and look at our culture as well, right? And to the extent that we want that we want to promote and continue with the health of our culture, we realize that is the physical, the psychological, and the social aspect of well-being that we needed to promote in a broader manner, right? So, as we continue the evolution, we included, a lot of educations on behavioral health, and not only on the stigma side, but also how to navigate the providers, right? How to get through the system. I think our partners have come a long way, but 5-6 years ago there was a lot of uncertainty on how to effectively navigate the provider space, right? And we were very effectively, we developed a really good partnership with our carriers. We put guides out there on how to access, where to access, what to do if this happens, who can you contact, the concept of a case managers that most of us hadn't heard at the time, right? So that piece of education. And then the social component of this on, the more that the employees feel tied to their communities, their values, that they represent an organization where, their values are expressed throughout the engagement of the community, that really rounds up a culture of well-being in our experience.
Outstanding. That's great. And I think several of you have touched on this point of that physical well-being, right? If you look 10 years ago, was kind of the focal point, right? It's like, how do we, and for organizations, how do we manage healthcare costs? Let's incentivize people to get a physical, right? Let's do something. They get some additional dollar amount, or they get some reduction to their premium. Let's do these things to help get them in the system. And we see lots of clients, and saw lots of clients at that time. They actually had all these behavioral health capabilities that they had from their carriers, but they weren't leveraging them because that wasn't the focal point at the time. And so there's tools like Vitality and all these things that were very focused on physical improvement and physical case management. But the mental health was right there, part and parcel, but it was very hidden because it wasn't driving the dollars the same way. And now the awareness is much, much greater to that. And so we're here. We're here. We're trying to figure out how to take it to the next step. And I do think the pandemic has accelerated a lot of this, right? Like that, this has served in many ways as an acceleration point. and it's kind of in some ways drinking from the fire hose. But at the same time, there is lots of tools available, and it's about bringing those to bear and bringing those, to
And I
these
think you
organizations.
said something really important, is leveraging those partnerships with your
Sure.
providers, right? Sitting down and strategizing with your providers. We have found in our experience that, our carriers, our vendors, they're really happy and ready to jump in. Is
Yep.
starting sometime that conversation and
Right.
understanding what you need to
Well,
leverage.
and it's like with most of those relationships, you have to be the vendor manager, right? You have to be the advocate. You have to do that. They're going to support, but they're not always inside, obviously, the operations to be able to do that. So,
Right.
yeah, great. Awesome start. Let's go ahead and kick off our first poll question. This, again, very foundational, very basic, but we want to establish a foundation as we go into the next bit of this session. So, want to have great response to this. Do you have a formal well-being program in your business? See great responses so far. We're already at half of our participants have filled it out. Thank you very much. Love the honesty. We will provide you this information as well as we get into the follow-up information that you'll have. So regardless of where you are, right? If you're, hey, we've got this really elaborate, sophisticated program, you can kind of see how far ahead you are of organizations, as well as you're able to see if you're not quite there yet, what are other organizations doing on a percentage basis. That tends to be very valuable. Let's go. If you're not sure, if you're staring at the poll question and you're like, I don't know which one, just go with your gut instinct. Let's see if we can get a couple more before we go ahead and close this out. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Let's end our polling. This does not surprise me one bit, right? But we've got, can you guys see this? We've got a former well-being program in 32% of the participants, 17 or no, not yet. Informal well-being activities, which is generally where it starts, right? You're going to see that on a macro level. People are increasing awareness. And I think this is the right approach. We're going to have a bias towards action, and we're going to start doing stuff that we think will help. And at the same time, it's going to be important to get a holistic strategy together as we're moving forward with that. So thank you guys very much for that. Again, we will share this information and make sure that you guys have it as you move forward in your respective businesses. Okay. All right. So we've established our foundation. I think we hit some really key points that we're going to be able to build on in the rest of the session. So let's start with Denise. Give us a few minutes on, how well-being is supported within your organization. So we just saw really a scatter of kind of where people are on the spectrum. And so let's start with, how is well-being supported within your organization, and give us some insight into what your well-being programs look like. And then we're going to move to Jeanette after yourself. And then we're going to go to Taylor and Nikki and just kind of see what are they seeing across the landscape of companies as well.
I think, first of all, the first thing that I would want to put forth is that our well-being program has been supported, influenced, encouraged by our leadership from the very beginning, which has been, fantastic. I mean, we moved from that informal process of, just wanting to do something to a very formal process, to a very structured now, well-budgeted, well-supported program that's supported by an internal task force that meets regularly, that helps to plan and look at what we're going to do, why we're going to do it, just how much is needed at a particular time, and also the ability to be flexible as things happen. For example, we had a period of time where we had quite a few pregnant employees. And who were coming back to work, and a number of them were nursing mothers. And so we had to be flexible and provide space within the office for them to pump and do the other things that they needed to do, that they would feel comfortable being back at work and knowing that they were able to do the things they needed to do for their family. We also have, just in terms of our employees are very outspoken about what they want and what they want to do, and what's needed. So we've created a program called Well Steps, which is kind of a rewards program that for every activity that they participate in, they get a point, and at the end of the years, they get a bonus reward for whatever a number of points they get. And it's been a motivator. It's been a really good motivator. I think the other motivator is just the flexibility we have in responding to different needs. For example, financial wellness became a major concern, particularly when you have a number of a younger group of employees who are looking at buying homes and just those kinds of concerns, having children and those kinds of concerns, and wanting to establish that financial wellness that sometimes brings stress, oftentimes brings stress. And in addition to that, our exercise programs, our nutritional programs that we do, we were doing them actually on site, and we now do them virtually, continuing to keep up with it. We had recently a mindfulness challenge that was very well attended. It was very popular, checking off random acts of kindness throughout the month, and every employee received a happiness journal, so that they had a chance to really talk about what they were grateful for, and really what was important to them in this particular challenging time. And so that was something that was really an interesting. But I think one of the most important things we did last year this time was at the beginning of the pandemic, we created a series called Building Resilience. And the reason Building Resilience came about was because, again, being involved in public health, and then, having to deal with issues around, masking, quarantine, and, everybody's working at home and the kids are at home. And then there was also the community issues, the social justice issues, what's going on in the outside world. And we felt that there was a need for the employees to begin to, open up and talk about that. So the Building Resilience project was really about a number of things. One was opening up dialogue so that people could stay connected and share their ideas, but giving them a safe space to do that. We set guidelines for, with, the employees help to set the guidelines for how it would be done. And so we've had dialogue sessions. We've had, speakers come in and to talk about issues around racism, health equity, because these are all the things that we're working within about diversity. We even had someone come in and do a kind of a gamification, a game called Factuality. I don't know how many of you have heard of that, but it really kind of takes the systemic racism's kind of process within systems, and have people explore that in a persona where they take on another person's or another group's, racial group, ethnic group's persona, and get a sense of how all of these various systems impact their plans for the present and for the future. And so it's been an active process, and we are keeping it going because our employees are saying, this is something that we want, this is something that we need, and this is essential to our well-being. And one other thing, one word that we learned a lot in this past year was the word pivot.
Yeah,
definitely had to do that this year.
Yeah, agility, being flexible, right? Like you use that word several times, in your conversation, right? And these things tend to be, from a culture standpoint, these are opportunities to build strong relationships with your employees, right? If you're showing awareness, it may not be perfect, but if you can have a bias towards action and they assume positive intent and you kind of move forward, then things will evolve, from that.
Exactly.
So no, that's great. That's great. And again, your lens of being in the health community as well as doing this is kind of a nice thing, but you got to take care of your own. And it sounds like you guys tried a lot of things, and that says a lot, about the organization. Hey, Jeanette, let's talk about what NFP's been doing in the same regards.
Well, it's been a journey, as I said before. Definitely, I agree with Denise when she mentioned that commitment at the senior level is critical. And it's not only commitment to the program or to sponsor a program or to finance a program, but it's putting yourself out there as a leader and talk about your own experiences, your own struggles, and show that vulnerability and that human side in your own journey so that others can, empathize, sympathize, and understand that we all have our own journeys, whether that is physical health, whether that is behavioral health, whether that is social or in the workplace, right? So we had our leaders talk openly wherever they felt comfortable about where they were and how that awareness came to mind. Then we engage our all level of the organization. We said, okay, if we're true to our values of listening and collaborating, this can't just be a top-down kind of a program, but let's listen to our employees. Let's meet them where they are. We may not be able to meet every single need at one point or another, but let's engage them and set priorities collaboratively, right? So, for 1 year, we said when we started to develop our community engagement, it is somewhat of a democratic process because we go out there with the survey and said, okay, this year, which charity, which cause are we going to support? And we give a space to employees to give us their feedback. And then we also understand that not one size fits all. So even that common theme on support of charities or causes takes a different flavor locally. So that network of champions that we have throughout all of our offices, come up with a way to engage locally in a way that is related to our overall theme. We have had so much success with that approach, and it's true engagement, and people feel connected and feel ownership of that community engagement as we go through that. It's a part, what we've also learned is that it's a participatory learning process for all levels of the organization, right? When you think about well-being, understanding and learning where people are, whether that's physical, whether that's behavioral, whether that is, where they feel where they belong or how they would love their communities to perceive us as an organization. It's been very eye-opening at all levels of the organization.
Great. Thank you for that. And I think, as we listen to kind of, what tactics and approaches these two organizations are taking, it is about flexibility and being entrepreneurial. Taylor, if we can go back to you, I mean, you've got this kind of macro view. You guys have tools, you have resources to help these organizations be successful. What are some of the things that you've seen organizations implement, or maybe you've gotten feedback about some of the positive tools or positive information that you guys are sharing to help raise awareness?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing that, I always recommend, and I'm hearing it in this conversation today, is understanding what the problem is and doing something about that, right? So developing a measured approach to addressing mental health and well-being in the workplace. And, we see a lot of organizations who are already doing this, and then they're coming back and like, our employees have survey fatigue. we're now facing this issue, right? Which is very real. But if you are administering any type of survey and trying to get a sense of where your employees are at, it's super important to include those questions about, stress, burnout, even mental illness, and just knowledge and access to these mental health supports that a company offers. One of the big things that we've seen lately is that there's been a bit of a discrepancy between what employers think employees need for their mental health and what employees actually need. Because there's some like really fantastic programs, and there's other things that it just doesn't quite fit, the situation. For example, within our own organization, we only have about 30 people. We're very, very small, right? And our CEO offered additional PTO as a benefit during the pandemic to take that time off, which is fantastic. And I will not complain about that. But at the same time, we had an increased workload because we were seeing those increased, needs from the mental health community and putting out information resources and just not being able to take that time off and take advantage of that PTO because of that workload factor. So, that would just be the first thing, is making sure you are taking that measured approach and really being thoughtful about the supports that you offer and that people are taking advantage of that. And to answer that second part of your question, in terms of mental health awareness, May is tomorrow, starts tomorrow. May is Mental Health Month. So if you are looking for any type of resources to promote that in your workplace, we do have like a toolkit that has like plug and play type of materials for, internal emails, newsletters, social media, that talks about tools to thrive. So we talked about, resiliency and even things like that emotional support that we all need during this time, addresses those types of concepts. If that is an interesting thing that you want to do and help kind of promote that, since it is right around the corner, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think, we hate to add one more thing to your task list for next week, but it sounds like if you're showing commitment to mental health, right, and to the top and well-being that we're talking about, some recognition or acknowledgement of where we are on the calendar, seems like it would be maybe an appropriate, maybe low-hanging fruit piece to kind of, provide an example for that is important to the org. So thank you for that. And again, we will make sure that we get the resources and get links and everything to the participants, so you can really take a look at what based on where you are in your journey of developing a well-being strategy, what could apply now, what could apply in the future, and those types of things. So great. Thank you, Taylor, for that. It's very helpful. Nikki, from your perspective, again, macro perspective, you're seeing organizations. What are organizations doing? And maybe if any examples of kind of what you're seeing people maybe take advantage of or being focused on, those types of things, as they're moving their organizations forward.
Sure. I think we all agree that leaders have to be involved in the conversation, but that follows with the recognition that employees are facing a lot of stigma. You can put lots of programs out there, have great resources, but if somebody inside feels like it's a flaw or a personal failure to be experiencing a mental health challenge, they're going to be resistant to use and seek care. So involve leaders. Leaders should see and provide resources. We just heard some great examples of the happiness journal, the surveys. But part of that resource might be those anti-stigma conversations. One of the things we've seen work very well are some lunch and learn style presentation. So let's talk about mental health. What are your signs and symptoms? What are resources that are available to you? So tactical, education and remove stigma. And this is why it's okay to get care. So at the end of the conversation, somebody can do something. So the ideal culture will tackle stigma, provide educational resources, and then promote the care and access to care. And we heard a little bit earlier about navigating the system, making it easier to navigate the system.
Awesome. Very tangible. And it is, is, again, these layers, I think I mentioned earlier, it's finding where is the right layer to start at to help have maximum impact, right? And that's going to be different based on where organizations are for that. But those are some great ideas. And you're right, it probably doesn't help a lot if you have all these programs, but if people are afraid to use them, or they think there'll be some sort of retribution or something, if they're not comfortable, that's going to significantly impact the value and the impact, the perception, and certainly could hurt over the longer term, right? Like as that grows, that's going to be more resistance to doing what it would end up being the right thing. So great. So let's go to our next poll question. And let's go ahead. I think we had good participation. Let's try to get a couple more folks here. Hopefully this is pretty straightforward. Who is responsible for well-being at work? We're rolling. Good participation to start. Thank you, everyone. Senior leadership, HR, employees, everyone, no one. Okay, couple more. Again, go with your gut. Just go with your gut. And it's not a trick question too, I should say that. Like, this is a very sincere, like, hey, who is it? And these are all anonymous. So we're going to share the macro information for everyone as we go forward. Okay, 3, 2, if you're not sure, just click something. 1, go. Thank you. Okay, Natalie, let's share that information. Okay, senior leadership. Like, you could almost, most of these, you could almost make a case that that is kind of the ideal answer, right? You want everyone, you want to have this holistic thing, everyone, because people have individual responsibility in this as well as the organization has responsibility in this. And there's different, shades of that and examples where either would apply. But again, not surprised, we kind of see a dispersed answer set here for that. I think what we did here, though, across the board is, like any major initiative for a business, like you had probably your CEOs doing Fitbit challenges X amount of years ago to help promote physical well-being, to help manage your healthcare costs, because that was an important business initiative when healthcare costs were going through the roof. The same thing applies. The equation is not a unique equation. It is tone at the top, and can we get buy-in so that people really believe this is an important initiative for the business. Therefore, they would be more interested and feel more supported as they go through it for that. Okay, so this next question, we did touch on this a little bit, so we may go through this one fairly quickly, but I think for Denise, if we can just start with, how did you determine what would be meaningful for your employees? And if you can in this, how are you supporting your underrepresented employee populations who may be experiencing heightened challenges? And so you talked about that. You referenced it in your kind of opening salvo or opening, comments. I think that's something that, that'd be very interested in hearing about,
Sure.
as well as setting up for the attendees here today.
Sure. Well, first of all, just let me say that our employees are never shy about giving their insight and their opinion about what's meaningful and what's important to them, which is a very good thing. And just as Nikki was saying, we do the surveys, we've done that. We ask them for their input during their one-on-ones with their managers, basically to keep their managers connected to what's important to them. I think one of the things to understand about, and I want to go back to something Jeanette had mentioned too, about what's meaningful, because one of the things that we did was to really look at how to connect well-being with philanthropy. And so there was a need, particularly last year, to look at, how really can we connect our philanthropy, our charitable giving, to what our beliefs are and what we want to support. And so they planned some activities and did some things and raised some money for the Southern Poverty Law Center, which was the group that they chose to support. I think the other thing to understand about our company is just the diversity. So to give you an idea, 50% of our employee base reflects a minority race, okay, of some sort. 68% of our employees base is female, all right? And 75% of our directors and above, and in terms of our management team, either reflect the minority race or are female. So that's the level. And we did a survey one time about the number of languages that were spoken, native languages, and I think we were like 22 various different native languages within the company. So with that level of diversity, there's a commitment because of the work we do. And I know Nikki had talked about some of the luncheons, those brown bag luncheons. a lot of times our work drives how we approach our well-being activities. For example, issues around stigma. We've had opportunity, we work in the mental health field, in substance abuse, mental health, various types of disorders across NIH, SAMHSA, a number of different organizations. And we also develop campaigns around certain issues, and mental health stigma has been one of those. And so we use those opportunities where we have, have been called to do a campaign to educate our whole company about what these issues are. And so the meaningful is things that are meaningful to our work, 9 times out of 10 are meaningful to our employees. And issues around mental health, issues around, aging, issues around caregiving, issues around various other types of things are very, very important. One of the things I have to mention is that our CEO, Ileana Quintas, was just recognized by the Washington Business Journal for her bringing diversity into public health and into business. And like I said, it really starts at the top and works its way down. But our employee concerns are very much a part of just how we engage everyone in terms of looking at those issues of well-being across the board. And when you talk about tools, for example, one of the things we did a number of years ago was the strengths survey, the strengths finder. And so we understood that when people knew their strengths and were able to build on those strengths, that some issues around their well-being were being addressed, because we were putting them in situations where we knew they were more than likely to succeed. In terms of work. So there's a broad spectrum of looking at how to engage folks and looking at those needs of those individuals. We have a minority of men, but we also have to address the health needs of the men in our company. So it changes from moment to moment in terms of it's very diverse in terms of how we address the needs across the company.
Yep. Great, Jeanette.
Yes, I want to take something that Denise just mentioned, and is the diversity of needs, right? And how do we address that? I think you have to know your population, and to the extent that you have data that you can take as a baseline to understand what where you are. And what you would assume from a data standpoint the needs are, and then engage, your network of employees, right? We have a D&I group that we engage with on a monthly basis from an executive standpoint. So every month, a different executive sits down with our D&I board, and that has employees from all levels across the organization, and we listen to what's going on, what's happening during that month, where they are, right? Then we also have our well-being champions around the company that and we engage with them it's not a monthly basis, it's a quarterly basis, but we have established feedback channels to understand what they are. So I'll give you a very pragmatic example of this, right? We really focus on behavioral health during the pandemic. And then during our reviews of our healthcare plan, we realized that our claims were dropping, right? That our mental health claims were increasing on a 2,000% on a weekly basis, which means that people were utilizing the resources. But our employees were not going for screenings. They were not going to the doctor, right? Because there was the fear of the pandemic, right? That maybe they felt like hospital or doctor offices were not safe at that point. So we realized that we were having success on a place that it took us a long time to get there. And then all of a sudden, what's happening with preventative care, right? So right now we're trying to balance the awareness and the promotion, and also remind people, hey, there's preventative care and physical care. There's safety right now. If you're afraid, talk to your office provider to know the COVID protocols. But we had a very dramatic drop, so we had to shift the strategy slightly, right? We didn't want to lose all the focus that we have on behavioral health, but we realized, oh my God, people are not going to the doctor, right? So understand where you are, right? And there's a part that is data, there's part of that is employee feedback, and there's just the trend, and how do you connect the two of them and continue to evolve your efforts overall and well-being. So that was a very interesting thing that happened. What Taylor said about PTO, we also experienced that, when we enhanced our PTO offering, that was not the most effective way to support our employees, because people were not taking PTO, right? As we were analyzing the data on utilization. So we shifted a little bit, and we talked to managers, and we asked them to schedule the long weekends, right? So have groups of employees that can take a long weekend, and sort of at the beginning, not forced, but kind of have a schedule where you tell people, hey, on Thursday night, say good night, right? And we'll see you on Monday. And then some of our offices starting to use okay, I'm saying goodbye for the day, right? Because what we were hearing was there was the days were stretching into nights. There was no separation between home and office. So some of our business had this initiative. Some of our offices had this initiative where, say goodbye to everybody. So they would send an email or say, hey, I'm leaving, good night, right? So there's pragmatic ways in which you can look at, the narrative, yes, but also look at what's happening from a data standpoint, and try to balance both.
Yeah, that's awesome. Those are all great examples. I think, the underlying message there of understanding your population from a data standpoint, right? From your systems, as well as seeking first to understand, what's going on and things of that nature. We have seen a lot of clients look at things like boundaries and trying to, like, I like the, hey, everyone, I'm goodbye, right? I'll see you next week. And like, this is versus getting that email at 11 o'clock from a vice president or a senior level person that most people are probably very compelled to respond to, right? And very compelled to look at. So, and those are things, again, leadership can set the tone for that, right? Leadership can say like, hey, we can still get business done. And we've seen that, I think, by and large. We certainly have organizations based on their business and based on the client responsibilities they have, where getting back in the office is a very important thing. But we also are seeing a lot of businesses that have become more comfortable with remote work. But the downside of remote work is exactly what Jeanette was referencing, which is now everything just blurs together. Yeah, you may not have a commute, but you are accessible, a pretty high, a higher percentage of the time, possibly. And so again, that's another acceleration point from this last year, is now remote work is more accepted, but you're also more accessible. And so doing things to be aware of that, and putting in measures to help curb that. And again, it just comes down to awareness. That's really the point I'm trying to make, is it's about awareness, understanding your population, understanding the trends. Every action has a corresponding action, right? So if you're going to do this, other things are going to happen, and just staying attuned to that from a leadership perspective. Leaders know their businesses. They will make good decisions, but they have to have the right inputs, to be able to do that. So
Yeah, just
yeah,
one
please.
one quick thing is, when we talk about data, I'm a strong believer in data-driven decisions. However, we can take out the human element and the stories behind the data, right? Because it's all about people. So you also need to balance those two and understand where people are also emotionally, not only on the trends that you see, because there's a lot of factors behind those trends. So
Yep.
just wanted to put that
No,
out.
I think it's a great point. It'd be very easy for in a strategy just to say, hey, let's look at our data and things like that. It goes back to, I think, what Denise had mentioned earlier. I think Jeanette referenced. I think it really every panelist references. You almost have to meet employees where they are, and that is really reliant upon managers having those relationships with the employees. There's lots of layers and lots of things that need to happen, but it's if employees feel that that they're being cared for and that their perspective is being understood, then they're going to, participate, right? And so that has to happen out at the field level, out at that mid-manager level and line level and things like that. So great. Really good conversation. Again, there's a couple things that were referenced in this that we will ensure that is summarized, as well as data, is anything that's connected that we think can add value to the participants here today. We will make sure that you get it for that. Okay, so let's go over to Nikki. We're going to talk here on our fourth question about, a lot of times when people think about behavioral health, they think about the EAP resource. They think about some of those maybe kind of older methods and things like that. Again, have stigma associated with them, like you very appropriately mentioned earlier. What are some ways that leaders can support and empower employees to start to take advantage of these resources that are available to them?
Mhm. It's a great question. We love EAP. It's an excellent starting point, but oftentimes it might be for a shorter duration condition. And we would encourage people to think about having employees contact their health plan. There are resources available. As leaders, are you working with your healthcare partners? Jeanette mentioned earlier that sometimes the partners are very excited and have resources. And I can say personally, we love to get that phone call when our partners say, what do you know? What's happening? What resources? What can we do? So work with your healthcare partners. Think about the way we are accessing care. Digital and virtual solutions are incredibly valuable, and in many cases for mental health can deliver similar and identical outcomes. So for behavioral health, the move to digital and virtual is important, and that includes things like self-care. So not just having an outpatient therapy visit with a provider by your video, but what about an app you can have in your pocket? So that's important. And my final idea, I will just go back to the comment I made about the lunch and learns, which is, and Jeanette just said it perfectly, which is data is great, but what about people? The lunch and learns are about connecting with people. Traditionally, they've been from maybe an EAP perspective, resilience, coping. What we have found important with United Healthcare and Optum is having these conversations about mental health. It is different conversations to talk about, coping and change management and talking about depression. So your healthcare partners can circle back to you and provide you with resources. We love having these conversations, educational, they're very personal, and then navigate to resources.
Yeah, I think it's extremely well said, and it actually makes me think about Taylor. And Taylor, I want you to comment on the same thing here in a second. But a lot of our conversation, just even with us today, is candidly use some vernacular, use some things that are very kind of macro level, programmatic type things. Taylor, like the third word out of her mouth was depression this morning. Fourth, like the prevalence of depression in employee, like that, those, again, and maybe it's just subconscious wiring, but we have to be comfortable talking about it. We have to bring those core issues to the forefront to help with address these other things that we're talking about, stigma and things of that nature. So I think that's really, really well said, Nikki, for that. But Taylor, maybe that is a takeoff. But again, some examples or recommendations, of new tools or health benefits that employers can leverage. We've talked about a couple on here already today, so feel free to invoke those as well. But things from your vantage point, what can employers do to help, move the needle on this for their business?
Yeah. So one recommendation, one tool, because I'm thinking about time here. So just what Nikki talked about with connecting with people. I think this is going to be super important as workplaces return to normal, is this idea of reconnecting with your colleagues. And this could still play into that if you're planning to do more remote work, hybrid type environment, or going back into the workplace, but trying to ramp up those opportunities to reconnect with the people that you work with on a daily basis. This personally, this is something that affected me because a huge part of dealing with depression, anxiety in the workplace was having support within the workplace and my coworkers. They're some of my best friends. It wasn't until we started all working from home that, and the issues of isolation, loneliness are real. These are some of the top issues that are cited by employees that they're facing because they just don't have that same type of support. So that would just be the one thing, is thinking about how to incorporate reconnecting people together as you're going back into this back to normal, I suppose, whatever that means anymore. And then I did want to share just one tool. It's one that I always suggest, and it's one of my favorites, because Jeanette, you brought this up about how people were taking advantage of these services, but then they weren't taking that next step in seeing a provider, which I find really, really interesting. And we see the same thing for different reasons, where people who are dealing with the signs or symptoms of mental health condition for the first time aren't going to a provider to deal with that. They're first turning to the internet to get answers. They just want to gather information. They're looking for do-it-yourself tools. They're looking for peers with lived experience to connect with before they make that decision to see a provider. So one of the tools that I suggest is we have an online screening program that has 10 different scientifically validated screenings for things like depression, anxiety, PTSD, disordered eating. It's all kind of covered there. Free, anonymous, confidential. I think it's a great tool where if people aren't necessarily ready to take advantage of services offered by a company or go to a provider, it's kind of like just a starting point, right, to point you in the right direction. And I know that hopefully that'll be shared with the resources as part of that after this.
Great. No, I agree with that. And I think tools that are really targeted and trying to collect information and again continue the dialogue. It's different than a dialogue, but if you're engaged in a survey like that, like you're still essentially, your brain is still in that dialogue, and I think continuing that's going to be very, very important as we go forward. All right, we've got a quick poll question. We've got one last thing from the panelists, and we'll try to get to a couple questions as we go forward here. So the last question here is, how do you measure the ROI of your well-being program outcomes? Now, this is if you don't have a program, we saw this before, like there's a percentage that had programs, didn't have programs, had informal programs. I think, how are you managing well-being philosophy within your organization is a totally appropriate way to answer this as well. Again, it's anonymous, and we're really just trying to get a sense of where people's heads are at, at this point in time. A couple more answers to read through here. Again, if you're not 100% sure, it's not clear, which wouldn't surprise me based on some of the answers before, just go with your gut instinct, or how would you think your organization would calculate these types of things? Okay, couple more. Let's get a couple more. If you're thinking, you're reading through, I'd love to get 2 more, 3 more. Going, gone. Thank you. Oh, I should have said it earlier. We got a couple there at the end. Awesome. Thank you guys very much for that. Again, we're going to share this information as we go forward. Measuring ROI for well-being program outcomes. We've got a lot of horses kind of in this race here. Retention, engagement seems to be a good one, right? Engagement would be a core value or a core item that if you have that, that's going to, obviously the ripple effect of that's going to be very positive within the organization. performance and productivity certainly being important as a business entity. Healthcare costs would be for sure a way to look at it. And so at the end of the day, it's probably a multi-pronged way of analyzing that. And it's probably something that's going to maybe be a little bit different for each org based on your culture and your philosophy for that. So thank you very much for the poll question. Again, we'll share this information for that. Last question I want to ask, I want to just kind of go through each of the panelists, and I think we'll have a few minutes for Q&A at the end. We just have a couple questions that look like they've come in. What do you think, and we've talked a lot about these things, so we're going to kind of put you on the spot here. What do you think is the most important thing that leaders can do today to set their team and business up for, let's call it like sustainable well-being success in 2021? Let's go ahead. Let's start with Denise. Denise, what do you think if you're consulting or you're advising a company right now, what is the one thing that they could do to help? Okay, you got two. As long as they're quick, you got two.
They're going to be quick.
Okay.
The first most important is that HR departments and leadership kind of keep their finger on the pulse of the company. You have to stay in touch with what's going on through listening to the employees or creating. The most important thing for us has been creating safe spaces for people to feel like they can share their innermost feelings about what's going on with them. They have to be able to feel safe in an environment to want to share that. The other thing is to create opportunities, and I've heard this, for employees to come together and stay connected under that common goal of building and maintaining their ability to thrive during difficult times. I mean, this past year was very difficult, I think, for a lot of us, but having a leadership that is committed to keeping people connected and helping them to be able to thrive and to really get into their work within a sense of well-being is extremely important.
Yeah, awesome. Jeanette, you want to double down on some of these or offer the same? It's certainly okay to say that those are correct and that's the way you see it as well.
I think it's Denise got it. I would say meet people where they are, and as a leader, don't assume that you have all the answers. So keep an open mind, because you'll find things that you don't expect coming from employee feedback.
Yeah, I think that's great. Taylor?
Keep it simple. Don't let mental health slip as a priority when workplaces return to normal. Integrate that as just like you would with your physical safety guidelines, your diversity inclusion efforts. Mental health should be a core part of that transition.
Yeah, awesome. Nikki?
Become an expert at noticing the needs of your population and be vulnerable in your conversations about mental health in a way that removes stigma.
We will retype these as well as part of our follow-up email, because those are pretty strong words, I think, from everyone. And I think we're talking about a major shift, right? This is not going to be addressed by just bolting it on to something that's been in place, right? This needs to be integrated into business operations and needs to be part of how your business operates as you proceed and as you move forward. Because we're already seeing, just even with these two panelists and many other organizations in this region, that people are doing that. They're able to understand, meet employees. I love what Jeanette said, meet employees where they are, collect this information, demonstrate caring to these employees, and then be able to build programs off of that. If you're not doing that, competing against firms that are is going to be very difficult, right? So you have to find ways to leverage your carriers, like we've talked about, leverage the knowledge that you're able to collect in a very, very vulnerable, mental health oriented way, and then apply techniques and tactics. And exactly what Denise said at the beginning, take action, have a bias towards action. It's okay if something's not perfect. Employees will assume positive intent if you are trying to respond to their needs. And again, if you're responding, it's like any survey, if you're responding to it, it has more validity as it goes through. And we know that from many different areas, but to now apply that to mental health and apply that to, this more vulnerable way of doing business as we go forward is only going to strengthen and only going to, have a better employee-employer relationship, which will drive business success for that. So really, really appreciate the time. We do have a couple questions. We've got a couple minutes here left. So I'm gonna pull a couple of these things. We've got one that says, "I love the idea of a lunch and learn to give tactics and resources." So that was mentioned several times. I think that's an outstanding idea. Do you have the materials that you can send for that in a follow-up? And so we'll talk about how to do that. But there's also a question here about, as an HR professional and not a healthcare provider, there's a question about is an HR person qualified to present on the topic? And so if I don't know, Nikki, if you can talk a little bit about resources, Jeanette, if you can talk about, maybe things you've done internally, it seems like you could potentially leverage your partners for some of that content and some of that delivery.
I would definitely encourage teams to work with their healthcare partners. Their behavioral health teams have resources that are available. So you don't have to be an expert in mental health. You are working with experts out there who can have these conversations. And there are some online resources. So I'll put some in the chat and we'll include them in the follow-ups.
Okay, outstanding.
Yeah, I agree with Nikki. We have leveraged our partners, our providers, and in my experience, they're always happy and ready to jump in. And, last year we had like monthly topics. So we had webinars around, depression. We had webinars around anxiety. We had webinars of, children's mental health too, right? And how to set a learning environment in your home. So there's a lot of expertise that it resides within your providers. A lot of this is at no additional cost to you, and leverage them. I think in my experience, it's been a very, very productive and helpful partnership.
Yep, awesome. Yeah, it may just be a open-ended question to your providers, right? We want to make mental health awareness and mental health a core part of our employee engagement strategy. What do you have to help us do that, right? The other question, got a couple other questions here real quick. One about accessing, I don't know, Nikki, if you or Taylor, you may be able to address this, or you guys might have seen this in your organizations. What are resources to employees who have trouble accessing care due to limited availability? Many mental health providers are experiencing a high demand. We've talked about the trend, right? And it's challenging for them to keep up. So,
I'd love
Nikki,
to tackle that one first.
Yeah, please.
Absolutely. This is where that move to digital and virtual has changed how people access care. The providers are burdened. They are experiencing the same thing we're experiencing in terms of managing family and work in a different world because of the pandemic, because of social unrest. But the shift to digital and virtual means flexibility. We don't have to think about distance before we kind of look at a radius near where we live or work. We kind of open up access when we do that virtual care. Something that we're doing internally is in our provider search, you can see virtual providers. You can actually see and schedule appointments online. So work with your partners to investigate those virtual options. It will help people get to care faster.
Yep, love it. Love it. Yeah, and I think it is leveraging the tools that you have. And even if it's starting the process, moving down that path, and then you're able to engage other resources in the future, that could be, again, having what actions can be taken in the interim. So thank you very much for that. And then last thing, yeah, I think that probably summarizes it. A couple of these things we'll address in a follow-up message. I do think we've addressed this thing, and I saw in one of the comments, and at Helios, we talk about bringing our whole selves to work. In my past engagement with an employer, they talked about an employee contract of one. And so at the end of the day, we have to make these connections more than ever so that we're able to respond to their needs. as we go forward as businesses and as we operate. So you guys, thank you very much for this. This has been approved for business credit for HRCI as well as SHRM. And so you have your program activity IDs for that. I know that's an important part of this. And then in closing, our next human capital impact forum is going to be at the end of October. Save the date now for that, and certainly check our website as more information becomes available for that. I want to thank all of our panelists. You guys did an outstanding job today. I'm excited. We're definitely going to put together a really robust follow-up communication to really maximize the value that participants were able to get from this session. Thank you again. You guys did a great job, lots of great information. And that will do it for our session here at the end of April. Thank you guys so much. Take care and have a great day.
Thank you.